Imagine standing on the banks of a river. But, not just any river. You are staring across the water at a piece of land your great-grandparents and their great-grandparents have been whispering about in the dark for centuries.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right. It's not just a geographical destination. It's a promise that has survived hundreds of years of brutal slavery, a terrifying escape, and, decades of aimless, punishing, wandering in a desert. You
Absolutely.
can hear the water rushing. It's at flood stage, so it's violent and muddy. You can feel the nervous energy of hundreds of thousands of people pressing in around you. Dust is swirling, children are crying, the elders are silent. Because today, after generations of waiting, you are finally crossing that river.
I mean, it is the ultimate threshold.
Yeah.
You're standing on the literal and spiritual boundary line between a life defined by wandering, trauma, and waiting, and a life defined by inheritance. It's an incredibly profound moment in human history.
It really is. So welcome to the deep dive, everyone. We are jumping straight into a massive theological pivot point today.
We really are.
Our mission is to unpack a profoundly rich study guide and a series of detailed infographics put together by Chris R. Villasas. It's titled Entering the Promised Land Under Joshua's Leadership. And if you think you're in for a dusty, dry history lesson about ancient Middle Eastern battles...
Which a lot of people do, to be fair.
Right. But think again. These sources decode a moment where human memory suddenly crashes into reality.
Which is honestly a beautiful way to frame it.
Yeah.
The sources make it clear right from the start that this isn't merely a military campaign or like a political regime change.
No, not at all.
In the logic of the ancient texts, this is the grand arrival. The God who made a seemingly impossible promise, who judged an empire, who split an ocean, is now demanding that a new generation step up and take hold of their inheritance.
And whether you are deep into biblical studies, fascinated by the mechanics of ancient history, or just curious about how massive generational shifts in leadership actually function in the real world, this is going to hit you with some serious aha moments.
Oh, definitely.
We are going to explore the psychology of faith, the burden of leadership, and the messy reality of the human condition. But before we even look at Joshua, the man who actually leads this charge, we have to deal with the baggage.
There is a lot of baggage.
So much. Where does this land promise even come from? We can't just start at the river, right?
No, if you start the story at the River Jordan, you are basically walking into a movie halfway through the third act.
Yeah, you're totally lost.
Exactly. You've missed the entire foundation. The sources we're looking at trace the roots of this land promise way, way back. We're talking Genesis chapters 1 and 2.
Okay, let's unpack this, because usually when people talk about Joshua, they start with Moses and the Exodus.
Right, that's the standard starting point.
But you're saying we have to go back to the literal beginning of the universe to understand a piece of real estate in Canaan.
We absolutely have to. The text highlights that in Genesis, the world isn't presented as some chaotic, neutral wilderness waiting for humans to just figure it out and build cities. It's presented as a highly ordered kingdom ruled by a creator. And humanity is placed there, specifically created in the divine image to steward that world, to reflect the character of the creator into the creation. The Garden of Eden isn't just a park. The sources describe it as a sanctuary.
A sanctuary, meaning like a temple.
A cosmic temple, yeah. It's a sacred space where the divine presence and human vocation seamlessly overlap.
Yeah.
Heaven and earth interlocking.
Wow.
There is perfect communion. Humanity has a home because humanity is in perfect relationship with the Creator.
But that doesn't last. We get to Genesis 3, the fall, the rebellion.
Right, and that rebellion fractures the communion. It corrupts the human vocation. But most importantly for our deep dive today, it introduces the concept of exile.
The first exile.
Exactly. Adam and Eve are driven out of that sanctuary. The source material makes a deeply profound connection here. The loss of holiness equates directly to the loss of home.
Loss of holiness is loss of home. That is powerful.
Humanity loses its home because it loses its holiness. From that moment on, humans are wanderers. So the entire redemptive movement of the ancient texts from that point forward is an answer to that primal exile.
It's like a rescue mission.
Yes, it's a rescue mission to restore a people and ultimately restore them to a place where that original presence can dwell with them again.
That completely reframes the whole concept of the promised land. It gives it this immense heavy weight.
It really goes.
It's not just, hey, here's a nice, fertile piece of real estate for you to settle down on and plant some vineyards.
Right, it's not just farmland.
It's Eden imagery revisited. It's the quest to return to that sanctuary. And this massive cosmic promise eventually narrows down to one guy, right? Abraham in Genesis 12.
That's the pivot. Out of all the scattered, wandering nations, the Creator singles out Abraham and makes a localized, specific covenant.
What were the specifics of that?
It's a promise of three things: land, seed, which means descendants, and a blessing that will eventually reach the whole world. And this promise is repeated. It's expanded to his son Isaac and his grandson Jacob. It is sworn by divine oath. The land of Canaan isn't arbitrary. It's chosen as the physical stage on which this restored covenant life is supposed to unfold in real time.
See, here is where the tension gets almost unbearable for me. Abraham gets this promise, but he dies living in a tent.
Yeah.
He never owns anything there except a burial cave. Isaac and Jacob live their whole lives as nomads, essentially squatters on the land they were promised.
Waiting, just constantly waiting.
Exactly. Jacob's son Joseph ends up dying in Egypt. And then silence. We're talking generations of silence. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, they all pass away. And their descendants, the Israelites, become brutalized slaves in Egypt for hundreds of years.
400 years of bondage. I mean, the psychological toll of that is staggering.
It is. To put this in perspective for anyone listening, imagine your great-great-grandfather leaves you this massive, unbelievably complex billion-dollar estate.
Okay, I'm with you.
You know the will exists. You know it has your family's name on it. But the estate gets locked up in legal probate. Not for a year, but for 400 years.
Oh, man.
You are born into a slum. You live in poverty. You suffer every day knowing there's a document somewhere that says you're royalty. At some point, that promise stops feeling like hope and starts feeling like a cruel joke.
It really does.
Which brings up a question I have to throw at you. If the God making this promise is all-powerful, why the multi-generational delay?
It's the big question.
Right. Why let them become slaves, rescue them, and then make them wander in a hostile desert for another 40 years? Why not just snap his fingers, wipe out the Canaanites, and hand over the keys to the estate on day one?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the delay is fundamentally about formation. The text explicitly argues that redemption is not merely a rescue operation.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, escaping bondage is only half the equation. The other half is formation for covenant faithfulness. The exodus out of Egypt, the plagues, the parting of the Red Sea, that prove that God hears, remembers, and has the sheer power to redeem.
Right, that was the rescue.
Exactly. But the wilderness that followed, well, that wasn't an accident. That was a forge. It was a place of intense testing, discipline, and revelation.
Getting them out of Egypt took a night. But getting Egypt out of them took 40 years.
That is the crux of the wilderness experience right there. They had a slave mentality. They didn't know how to be a free people, let alone a holy nation that could host the divine presence.
They were just institutionalized.
Yes, they had to learn, often through severe failure, that they were supposed to live by divine instruction, not by the brutal power dynamics they learned in Egypt.
And they failed spectacularly. I mean, when they finally reached the edge of the Promised Land the first time at a place called Kadesh Barnea, they sent spies in. The spies came back and said, the people there are giants, the cities have huge walls, we look like grasshoppers to them. And the whole nation basically had a meltdown and tried to elect a new leader to take them back to slavery in Egypt.
It was a total collapse of faith. They refused to enter.
Yeah.
And the sources emphasize this. They forfeited immediate entry.
Because of that one moment.
Yes, that entire generation was sentenced to wander until they died in the desert. But notice, the issue wasn't that the promise was fake or that God was unable to fulfill his word. The issue was human unbelief.
Wow.
God's kingdom advances through promise before performance. The land is an act of grace before it is an inheritance.
It's a gift, but a gift requires a receiver who is actually capable of holding it. If you give $1 billion estate to someone with the mindset of an oppressed slave who doesn't understand stewardship, they'll just destroy it or turn it into another prison.
Precisely the danger. And so that older, fearful generation passes away in the dust of the wilderness.
Even Moses.
Yes, even Moses, the legendary larger-than-life prophet who brought them out of Egypt, who spoke with God face to face, even he dies on a mountain without crossing over, due to his own moment of rebellion.
Which is just staggering to think about. Moses doesn't make it. The promise is finally ready, a new generation is standing on the banks of the river, but they need a new kind of leader to actually step out of the waiting room and into reality.
And that vacuum, that immense weight of expectation, is where Joshua steps into the frame.
Yeah, let's talk about Joshua. The book of Joshua, chapter 1, opens with what might be the most dramatic transition in ancient literature. The text just drops this hammer. Moses, my servant, is dead. Now therefore arise, go over this Jordan.
It's so stark.
It really is. There's no long mourning period outlined in that command. A generation is gone, the mantle passes. But the promise isn't dead just because the mediator died. God commissions Joshua directly. And the phrase that gets repeated over and over is, be strong and courageous.
It is the defining mandate of his life. But it's vital to look deeply at how the text defines success for Joshua, because it is completely counterintuitive to how we operate today.
Oh, completely.
His success is explicitly tied to covenant conformity, not military innovation or strategic brilliance. The divine instruction is, be careful to do according to all the law that Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left.
See, this is where I really struggle with modern comparisons. I look at our world today, and when we think of leadership, we think of disruption.
The Silicon Valley mindset.
Exactly. Move fast, break things. A great leader is a visionary who comes in, throws out the old playbook, rebrands the company, and casts a totally new vision. But Joshua is basically handed the keys and told, do not invent a single new thing, just execute exactly what was written down by the guy before you.
Yeah.
How does that redefine our understanding of what makes a leader great?
It completely upends the modern paradigm. The sources emphasize heavily that Joshua's leadership is derived. It is not self-generated.
Derived leadership. I like that term.
Yeah. He is a servant leader operating strictly under divine authority. He doesn't improvise new revelations. He doesn't hold a focus group to redefine the mission based on what the younger generation wants.
Right, no rebranding.
He receives the word, he obeys it, and he executes it. His greatness actually lies entirely in his submission.
That is wild. His greatness is his submission. In our culture today, submission is almost a dirty word. It implies weakness.
But for Joshua, it is the source of unbreakable strength. And look at his resume. He wasn't some charismatic outsider chosen out of nowhere to shake things up. He was prepared by decades of obscure, long obedience.
He had a history.
A deep history. He had served as Moses' personal assistant. He was one of the original 12 spies who went into the land 40 years prior, and he was one of the only 2 who actually believed God could deliver it.
He was literally in the room when the older generation panicked and he tried to stop them. He almost got stoned to death by his own people for telling them to trust the promise.
Exactly. He has the scars of faithful leadership. He learned through the crucible of the wilderness that entering the land required courage rooted in the presence of God, not confidence in chariots or military strategy.
Right.
And his leadership, as the text unfolds, is deeply pastoral. He isn't just a general shouting orders. He has to manage the sheer existential fear of the people. He has to resolve tribal conflicts. He has to confront severe sin within the camp. And he has to continually interpret bewildering events through the lens of God's ancient promises.
You know, thinking about our own lives, our careers, our families, there is something incredibly freeing about Joshua's model for you, the listener.
How so?
We put so much pressure on ourselves to be the most creative person in the room, to have the hottest take, to be a disruptive visionary. But sometimes true success is just having the courage to be radically faithful to your core principles, just doing the right thing day after day in long obedience in the same direction.
That's the friction point we often miss. The command to be strong and courageous isn't an invitation to a personality-driven macho boldness.
Yeah.
It's not a psych-up speech before a football game. It's a solemn call to covenant faithfulness in the face of incredibly costly obedience.
So Joshua accepts the mission. He embraces this derived, submissive leadership. But between his people and this promise is the Jordan River. It's flood season. It's deep. It's wide. And it's dangerous.
Very dangerous.
It's time for the people to move, and Joshua gives the orders. But the way they approach this river is utterly bizarre by any tactical military standard.
It is entirely liturgical.
Wait, liturgical, like a church service.
Exactly. The crossing of the Jordan in Joshua chapters 3 and 4 is a deliberate, orchestrated echo of the crossing of the Red Sea under Moses. But the mechanics here are fascinating, and they demand a different kind of faith. Joshua tells the priests to take the Ark of the Covenant, which is the physical gold-covered chest that represented the footstool of God's presence, and to carry it into the water first.
Not the engineers. Not the heavy infantry. The priests.
The priests.
Yeah.
And they have to step into a rushing, overflowing river. The text says the water didn't stop flowing until their feet actually touched the edge of the water.
Wow.
They had to commit to the step before the miracle happened. And when they do, the waters pile up in a heap miles upstream, and the entire nation, men, women, children, livestock, crosses the riverbed on dry ground.
Just picture the psychological impact of that. You're a young Israelite. You've heard your parents talk about the Red Sea your whole life, but it sounded like a myth.
A fairy tale.
Yeah.
Friendly.
Now, you are walking past these priests, holding this glowing golden box, standing on dry dirt in the middle of a river gorge with a wall of water just hovering in the distance. It's terrifying, but it's absolute proof.
It's undeniable.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Once they cross, they don't immediately blitz the nearest city. Joshua stops the whole procession.
He halts the momentum completely. He orders 12 men, one from each tribe, to go back into the middle of the dry riverbed, pick up massive stones, carry them to the other side, and stack them up at their first camp as a memorial.
I love this detail so much because to me it's like setting up a permanent, undeletable calendar notification for your soul.
That's a great way to put it.
Or like building a physical monument to cure spiritual amnesia, because humans forget everything. We experience a massive breakthrough, a literal miracle in our lives, and a month later we're complaining that the Wi-Fi is slow.
Yeah, exactly.
We just adapt to the new normal and forget the grace that got us there.
Spiritual amnesia is exactly the human condition. And the sources point out that this is why the crossing is designed as a liturgy in motion. God knows they need a physical touch point. Joshua explicitly tells them, in the future, when your children ask you, what did these stones mean? You will tell them the water was cut off.
It forces a conversation across generations.
Right. It ensures that their identity remains tethered to divine deliverance, not their own military prowess.
They're curating their memory.
Yes. This miracle is essentially an initiation rite for a new generation. They are literally stepping out of the wilderness and onto the dirt of the promise, entirely by faith.
Okay, but what happens next at their camp in Gilgal pushes that faith to an almost absurd extreme.
It really does.
Right. So they are across the river, the water flows back, they are cut off from retreat, they are standing in enemy territory, surrounded by hostile, fortified city-states. And what does Joshua do? Does he build trenches? Does he sharpen swords? No. He orders the mass circumcision of every male in the camp.
Which, from a strategic military standpoint, is literal suicide.
Completely.
You have just invaded a hostile country, you are completely exposed, and you intentionally disable your entire fighting force with a painful surgical procedure, leaving them bedridden for days.
Why? I mean, I know it's the sign of the covenant given to Abraham, but couldn't they have done this back in the desert? Why wait until they are in the crosshairs of the enemy?
Well, this raises an important question about the nature of their conquest.
Yeah.
The generation that died in the wilderness had failed to circumcise their children. They were under discipline. So this act at Gilgal is a massive covenant renewal. It is a physical rolling away of the shame and reproach of Egypt in the wilderness. But doing it in enemy territory reinforces a core, radical theological truth. The land is a gift. It is not going to be taken by the strength of their swords, but by their obedience to the covenant.
That is so counterintuitive.
It is. By making themselves completely vulnerable, they are forced to trust that God will protect them. The battle belongs to the Lord, not the army.
They had to establish their identity before they could engage in the activity. That is so profound.
It's the only way it works.
So they heal, they celebrate the Passover, eating the produce of the land for the first time. The manna from heaven stops. They are fully present in the promise. But now they have to face Jericho. And if the river crossing and the circumcision defied human logic, Jericho takes it to a whole new level of strange.
Jericho is a masterpiece of theological messaging.
Really? How so?
In Joshua 6, we see the first major military engagement. Jericho is a heavily fortified city, a fortress guarding the pass into the interior of the land. It's intimidating. But the strategy God gives Joshua involves no siege ramps, no battering rams, no starvation tactics.
It involves a marching band.
It's essentially, yes. For 6 days, the armed men, 7 priests blowing ram's horns, and the Ark of the Covenant march around the city in total silence. Just the sound of the horns and marching feet. Then they go back to camp.
And then,
On the seventh day, they march around it 7 times. The priests blow a long blast. Joshua commands the people to shout, and the walls collapse.
it's so bizarre that I have to imagine the people inside Jericho were initially terrified, but by day 4 or 5, they were probably standing on the walls laughing at them. It looks ridiculous.
It looks entirely foolish to the world,
Yeah.
but the sources make it clear. Jericho falls as a definitive theological statement.
Not a military one.
Right. The architecture of the city doesn't fail because of acoustic resonance from the shouting. It falls because the creator of the land is handing it over. It establishes a paradigm for the entire conquest victory. It comes through unconventional obedience, not conventional warfare.
It's an overwhelming, miraculous victory. The momentum must have felt absolutely unstoppable. You'd think, we just blew down a fortress with trumpets, we can take the whole world.
Naturally.
But then immediately after this euphoric high, the narrator slams into a brick wall. The tone shifts dramatically. We hit the story of a small town called A and a man named Achan in Joshua chapters 7 and 8.
The paradox of victory and defeat. Fresh off the triumph of Jericho, Israel sends a small detachment to attack Ai. It's a much smaller, less intimidating city. They expect an easy win.
But it's not.
It is a disaster. The Israelites are routed, 36 men are killed. The text says the hearts of the people melted and became like water.
Joshua is devastated. He tears his clothes, falls on his face before the ark, and basically says, God, why did you bring us here just to let the Canaanites wipe us out? Your great name is going to be ruined.
He's panicking.
Yeah. And I find God's response fascinating. God doesn't comfort him. God basically snaps at him. Get up off your face. Israel has sinned. They have transgressed my covenant.
God reveals that someone took devoted things. Before Jericho fell, Joshua had given a strict divine mandate. The city is under the ban.
What does that mean exactly, under the ban?
It means it is uniquely devoted to God for destruction. No one is to take any plunder for personal enrichment. All the silver and gold goes into the treasury of the Lord. It was a test of whether they were fighting for God's kingdom or their own greed.
And it turns out one man failed the test, Achan. He saw a beautiful Babylonian cloak, some silver, and a bar of gold. He wanted it, he took it, and he buried it under the dirt inside his tent.
Just one guy's secret stash.
Right. Now, I have to play devil's advocate here because this is where the modern reader hits a massive wall. Modern individualism screams at this story.
Oh, absolutely.
Why does one guy's secret hidden theft cause an entire military defeat for the whole nation? Why did 36 innocent soldiers die at Ai because of a cloak in Achan's tent? It feels incredibly harsh and unjust to punish everybody for the sins of one.
I push it even further. It doesn't just feel harsh to us. It feels like a violation of our core belief that we are only responsible for our own autonomous action.
Right. I'm responsible for me. You're responsible for you.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is that the ancient world, and the biblical text specifically, operates on a profound concept of corporate solidarity and corporate holiness.
Okay, explain that to me. Break down corporate holiness like I'm 5.
Think of the nation of Israel like a single human body. If you have an infection in your appendix, your foot doesn't get to say, hey, that's not my problem, I'm healthy.
The foot still gets a fever.
Right. The infection poisons the entire bloodstream, and the whole body gets sick. The whole body is compromised. Israel is bound together by a covenant. They are one entity before God. When Achan brought the devoted or cursed things into the camp, he essentially injected a lethal virus into the bloodstream of the community.
So the presence of a holy God cannot dwell in a space that is knowingly harboring corruption.
Exactly. The land is a gift, but it is not morally neutral. It is holy ground. The sources emphasize heavily that the covenant people cannot possess a holy inheritance while harboring hidden rebellion.
He didn't take it seriously.
Achan treated God's command as a suggestion. He treated the holy as common. And the terrifying lesson here is that hidden sin undermines communal strength. No community, whether it's an ancient nation or a modern organization or a family, thrives on public strength while ignoring private corruption. The rot eventually collapses the structure.
That is a heavy lesson. And the fallout is brutal. Achan is found out, he confesses, but the consequences remain. He and his family, who were presumably complicit in hiding the stolen goods in their shared tent, are executed.
The cancer is surgically removed from the camp.
Yeah. Only then does God tell Joshua to go back to Ai, and this time, using brilliant military ambush tactics, they take the city. It's a sobering whiplash. God gives them the victory, but it requires deep, painful internal cleansing.
It proves that Israel cannot live in the land on the basis of past success alone. Jericho's victory didn't give them a free pass to ignore holiness of the eye. Covenant obedience matters in the present tense.
And just when you think they've learned their lesson about obedience, the text throws another curveball in Joshua 9, the Gibeonites. This story is fascinating because it's not a military battle, it's psychological warfare.
It's a masterclass in deception. The Gibeonites are a local Canaanite people who realize they can't beat Israel in a straight fight. So they put on worn-out clothes, patch up old wineskins, put moldy bread in their bags, and walk into Joshua's camp, pretending to be ambassadors from a distant country far outside the Promised Land.
They say, "We've heard how awesome your God is. We've come from very far away. Make a peace treaty with us." And Joshua and the leaders look at the moldy bread, they look at the worn-out sandals, and they think, well, the evidence is right here in front of our eyes. Makes sense.
They fall for it completely.
And they swear an oath to protect them.
And then 3 days later, they find out these people are actually their next-door neighbors.
The ultimate facepalm. But here's the tragedy. The text explicitly points out why Israel was fooled. It says, the Israelites sampled their provisions but did not inquire of the Lord. They trusted their own common sense instead of seeking divine guidance.
Which is a recurring theme of human failure. We rely on our own empirical observation. I can see the moldy bread, I know what I'm dealing with, and we fail to recognize the spiritual reality behind the situation.
Right.
But what's equally important in this story is what happens after the deception is revealed. Joshua has sworn an oath in the name of God to protect the Gibeonites. And even though he was tricked, he honors the oath.
He doesn't just say contract void due to fraud.
He doesn't. And that shows the complexity of navigating this conquest. It requires profound integrity. You have to be faithful to your agreements because your oath reflects on the character of the God you represent.
So they spare the Gibeonites, and because of that treaty, Israel immediately gets dragged into a massive regional war to defend them in Joshua 10, which kicks off the southern campaign, followed by the northern campaign in chapter 11.
Right. It's important to realize this wasn't an overnight sweep. The text compresses it, but this was years of difficult, grueling conflict. Step by step, mountain by mountain, God delivers these massive coalitions of kings into Joshua's hands.
And the strategy changes too, right?
It does. The strategy shifts from the liturgical march at Jericho to brilliant tactical night marches and ambushes, but the theological point remains constant. God is actively giving the land, just as he promised.
But this intense focus on warfare, I mean, we have to address the elephant in the room. Because as we read these chapters, cities being burned, populations being put under the ban, it brings up what is undeniably the most uncomfortable, controversial part of the book of Joshua for modern readers, the sheer reality and brutality of the warfare itself.
It is deeply troubling for many, and it should be. Reading about judgment should never be easy. The sources we are analyzing do not shy away from this. They address the theological depth of this warfare head-on.
Okay, what do they say?
But it is crucial to understand the very specific framework the biblical text provides for these events. This is not presented as a general license for human violence or some broad justification for holy war in the name of religion.
Right. It's not imperial expansion just for the sake of wealth or ego.
Exactly. The text frames this as a highly unique, redemptive historical event. It is an act of divine, localized judgment against deeply entrenched generational wickedness. We have to remember the context of the ancient Canaanite culture.
The sources touch on this. This wasn't a peaceful utopia that Israel just rudely interrupted.
Not at all.
The Canaanite religious systems were notoriously brutal. We're talking about practices like rampant temple prostitution and, most horrifyingly, systemic child sacrifice, burning their own children on altars to appease their gods.
The biblical narrative frames the conquest as God's long-delayed judgment on that specific, hardened, demonic wickedness. Back in Genesis, God told Abraham his descendants would have to wait 400 years because the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure.
So there's a grace period.
Yes, God gave them 4 centuries of patience. But justice eventually demands an accounting. The Israelites were acting as instruments of that specific judgment while simultaneously taking hold of the covenant promise.
And the text is ruthless in warning Israel not to get arrogant about this. God repeatedly tells them, I am not driving these nations out because you are so righteous. You are just as prone to rebellion. If you start adopting their practices, if you start sacrificing your children and worshiping idols, this land will vomit you out exactly like it vomited them out.
They are an instrument of justice, not a morally superior master race.
That is a vital distinction. But what makes the narrative so breathtakingly rich is that right in the midst of this severe, sweeping judgment, the text deliberately highlights a story of radical, pinpoint mercy.
Rahab. We have to talk about Rahab.
We really do.
Her story is in Joshua chapter 2, and the culmination is in chapter 6.
Yeah.
Rahab is a Canaanite woman. Specifically, she's a prostitute whose house is built right into the defensive wall of Jericho. Geographically, socially, and morally, she represents the absolute extreme margin of society.
She is literally on the wall.
Yes. By all accounts, she represents everything that the impending judgment is coming to wipe out.
Yet she is the one who hides the Israelite spies when they scout the city. And she doesn't just hide them out of political calculation. Her dialogue in chapter 2 is astounding.
It's one of the clearest confessions of faith in the entire book. She tells the spies, "I know that the Lord has given you this land. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below."
A Canaanite prostitute recognizes the cosmic reality of who God is, while the powerful king of Jericho just walls himself up in fear and defiance. She believes the promise before the Israelites even cross the river.
It's incredible faith.
And because of that faith, when the walls of Jericho collapse, her section of the wall miraculously stands. She and her family are saved.
And she isn't just spared and sent away. She is brought into the camp. She is grafted into the nation of Israel. She ultimately becomes an ancestor of King David, and by extension, an ancestor of Jesus Christ.
So, what does this all mean? How do we reconcile this? We have a holy God commanding the severe removal of nations in judgment. But then he stops the entire machinery of war to save a Canaanite outsider simply because she believed. How do those two things exist in the same text?
The sources make a brilliant synthesizing point here. Judgment and mercy are not opposites in Scripture. They are two sides of the same coin of God's character. Rahab's inclusion is astonishing because it proves the conquest wasn't about ethnic cleansing.
Right.
She isn't saved by her ethnicity, she's Canaanite. She isn't saved by her moral merit. She's a prostitute. She is saved entirely by faith.
The line between judgment and mercy isn't a tribal line or a bloodline. It's a faith line.
That is the theological core. And furthermore, this whole dynamic introduces a crucial biblical concept: rest through conflict. The Promised Land is repeatedly described as rest. They are no longer refugees. They have homes, wells they didn't dig, vineyards they didn't plant. But it is a rest that requires intense, sustained battle to secure and maintain.
They have to fight to purify the land from idolatry so that the rest can actually be enjoyed.
Yes. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this perfectly anticipates the New Testament reality for Christians. Believers are saved by grace. They enter a spiritual rest in Christ, yet they are immediately called to fight a relentless war against sin, the world, and the devil.
The conflict doesn't negate the rest.
Right. The conflict is the mechanism for establishing the rest in reality.
Because these themes are so massive, we're talking about holy war, land claims, divine promises, judgment, and mercy, it is incredibly easy to misinterpret them. You can twist these stories to justify almost anything.
Very easily.
In fact, the sources explicitly warn us about some major danger zones, ways we can completely misread the map of Joshua and drive off a theological cliff.
And these danger zones are crucial to highlight because misreading the book of Joshua has historically led to some very dark, destructive places in human history. The first danger zone highlighted in the study guide is triumphalism.
Explain triumphalism. Is that just the idea that the Christian life is always an easy victory?
Essentially, yes. It's the name it and claim it mentality.
Yeah.
You read the story of Jericho and you think, if I just march around my problems and shout loud enough, the walls of my debt or my illness or my relational issues will just magically fall down. It collapses the immense complexity of the biblical story into a magic trick.
It ignores the fact that right after Jericho came the devastating defeat at Ai.
Exactly. And it ignores the fact that the book of Joshua is immediately followed by the book of Judges, which is a horrific, depressing cycle of failure, idolatry, and oppression. Entering the land did not eliminate human sin. Land possession is not final sanctification. Believers today shouldn't confuse initial spiritual victories with the final end state of perfection. The fight continues.
The second danger zone is a big one, especially today: nationalism. This is the practice of taking these ancient, specific land promises made to Israel and applying them as a blank check for modern political projects or earthly territorial claims.
This is a very common issue.
And I want to be really clear for you listening right now, based strictly on the theological sources we're deep diving into today, applying the book of Joshua to justify modern geopolitics is a theological distortion.
Right?
We are simply reporting the study guide's theological stance on these ancient texts. We aren't here to endorse or take sides on any modern political conflicts, but the text of the source is clear. The church must read Joshua Christologically and canonically, not as a political manifesto.
Let me translate Christologically and canonically for the listener because it's important.
Please do.
It means reading the Bible as one unified story that points toward Jesus Christ, that's Christologically, and reading it in the context of the whole Bible, which is canonically. The land promise was a specific, temporary covenant promise designed for a specific era in redemptive history to set the stage for the Messiah.
Got it.
Taking it out of that ancient context and using it to draft modern borders is a severe misuse of the text.
Which perfectly leads to the third danger, which is almost the opposite error, but just as common moralism. This is reducing the bloody, complex theological book of Joshua into a sterile self-help book about bravery.
The Be a Joshua syndrome.
Yes. Conquer the giants of your fears. Be strong and courageous in your corporate merger. Slay the Canaanites of your bad habits.
When you do that, you entirely strip out the theology. It makes the story about human effort. This raises an important question. What is the actual basis of Joshua's courage?
It's not just positive thinking.
No, if we just say be brave, we miss the entire point. Courage in this book is derivative. It is the byproduct of covenant faith. Joshua is brave only because God has promised to be with him. It's not about Joshua having a strong alpha male personality. It's about the objective reality of God's faithfulness.
Think about it this way. It's like taking a highly specific prescription written by a doctor for a specific patient thousands of years ago to cure a specific lethal disease and trying to swallow those same pills today just because you have a mild headache at the office.
Oh.
You're misusing the medicine. It might actually hurt you. We can't treat Joshua like a generic motivational poster.
That's a great analogy. The fourth danger zone is softening God's holiness. Modern sensibilities, our culture today, we desperately want a God who is endlessly gracious, therapeutic, and affirming, but never exacting. We want a buddy, not a holy king.
We want the God who saves Rahab, but we want to edit out the God who judges A.
Precisely. But Joshua refuses to indulge that fantasy. The severe judgment on Canaan, the terrifying, instantaneous death of Achan's family. These stories violently confront us with the severity of sin.
It's unavoidable.
Sin is not just a mistake, it destroys, it defiles, and it actively separates humanity from the source of life. We cannot ignore the reality of divine justice if we want to actually understand the text.
And the final danger zone the sources point out is flat symbolism. This is the temptation to erase the history altogether, to say, oh, none of this actually happened in the dirt. It's all just a spiritual metaphor for personal growth.
Right. It's important to understand the concept of typology, where a historical event serves as a pattern or a preview, pointing to a greater future reality. But typology does not cancel history.
The history still happened.
Exactly. Joshua involved real dirt, real tribes, real cities burning, and real human lives in space and time. God acts in actual history, not just in the realm of ideas.
So if the Promised Land isn't a blank check for modern politics, and it isn't just a purely abstract metaphor, what is its ultimate purpose in the grand, overarching story of the Bible? How does this deep dive wrap up?
We find the climax in a beautiful summary statement in Joshua chapter 21, verse 45. By this point, the major battles are over. The land has been surveyed and divided among the 12 tribes. Everyone is settling into their inheritance.
They made it.
They made it. And the text establishes this central anchoring truth. It says, not one word of all the good promises that the Lord had made to the house of Israel had failed. All came to pass.
Not one word failed. Despite the 400 years of slavery, despite the wilderness, despite Achan's sin, despite the giants, that is the theological center of gravity for the whole book. God keeps his word.
He does. It is stunning testimony to divine fidelity. But the study guide draws a brilliant, crucial distinction right here at the end. Fulfillment is not the same thing as completion.
Wait, meaning what?
Meaning Joshua brings them in, the physical land is received, the immediate promises made to Abraham are fulfilled, but the human heart still needs renewal. The rest they experience in Canaan is real, but it is not final.
Because they bring their own brokenness into the new land. They still have sin. They still have rebellion brewing under the surface. It's like moving to a beautiful new house on a beach to save a failing marriage. The scenery changes, but the internal rot is still there.
That's exactly it. The physical geography couldn't change their spiritual reality. And so the text inherently points forward. It demands a sequel. It points to a greater Joshua. And here's a fascinating linguistic detail. The name Jesus in Greek is Isus. That is the exact literal equivalent of the Hebrew name Joshua.
Are you
They're
serious?
the exact same name. Jesus is the greater Joshua.
Okay, my mind is slightly blown right now. So Jesus is Joshua 2.0.
He is the ultimate fulfillment.
Yeah.
Where the first Joshua brought a temporary physical exodus, Jesus brings a permanent spiritual exodus. He doesn't just conquer Canaanite kings, he conquers the root enemies of humanity's sin, death, and Satan.
Wow.
And he doesn't just lead his people into a small strip of contested territory in the Middle East. He is leading them to the ultimate promised land, which the New Testament describes as the renewed, resurrected creation.
The ultimate rest. The sources tie this directly to the New Testament book of Hebrews. Right. Hebrews chapters 3 and 4 reflect back on this exact history and make the argument that if the original Joshua had given them final ultimate rest, God wouldn't have spoken centuries later through David about another day of rest.
Yes, precisely. The land in Joshua is typological. It foreshadows the everlasting inheritance. It was a scale model of the new heavens and new earth.
So we all live in the gap. We live between a promise being inaugurated and its full realization. Theologians call it the already but not yet.
Right.
And for you, as you are navigating your life, this is where the grand narrative synthesizes into daily reality. Joshua shows us how to stand in that excruciating gap between what God has promised and what we are currently experiencing without losing our minds or abandoning our faith.
It's about enduring the gap.
Yeah. We trust God's character through the agonizing delays. We relentlessly pursue holiness, even when it's unpopular. And we live as pilgrims of hope. It brings to mind Joshua's final, famous declaration at the very end of his life in chapter 24, when he looks at the people and says, "Choose this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord."
It is a profound eschatological hope meaning, a hope anchored in the ultimate end goal of history. Christians aren't just meant to survive day to day until they die, they are heirs.
They are heirs.
The temporary peace that Joshua achieves was meant to be a preview, a taste of the eternal rest offered in Christ. Present obedience isn't wasted labor, it's active preparation for that coming fullness.
We have covered a massive, sprawling amount of ground today. Let's recap this epic journey. It started with a promise made to a nomad named Abraham, a promise of a place where God and humanity could dwell together again, echoing the lost sanctuary of Eden.
A long time ago.
Yeah. It moved through the agonizing suffering of slavery in Egypt, the miraculous, terrifying Exodus, and the long, disciplinary, identity-forging wandering in the wilderness. And finally, under Joshua's incredibly unique brand of derived, submissive leadership, a new generation crosses a miraculous river.
They finally step in.
They take possession of the land through a paradox of faith, vulnerability, and obedience. But even that incredible achievement was just a shadow, a temporary stage pointing to an even greater cosmic reality in Jesus. The overarching, unshakable truth: God keeps his promises.
Through generations, through failures, through centuries of silence, every single word stands.
So as you go about your week, whether you are navigating a massive, intimidating life transition right now, whether you are waiting out a painfully long delay for a promise to be fulfilled in your own life, or if you're just struggling to maintain your integrity in a world that demands constant compromise, look to Joshua.
He's the model.
His model of courage, derived entirely from the Word of God, and his radical, faithful obedience is a masterclass in how to live purposefully in the gap. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've spent a lot of time today talking about how the physical land of Canaan was a shadow. It was a temporary stage for God to show his faithfulness, pointing toward the ultimate reality of a new creation. But think about this. If the very dirt, the rivers, and the stone walls of ancient Canaan were treated as holy ground simply because God's presence was there, how should that change the way we treat the physical world we inhabit right now?
Whoa, that's a big question.
Right. If a physically renewed, restored creation is our ultimate inheritance, does that give us a free pass to ignore and exploit the earth today because it's all going to burn anyway? Or does it make our stewardship of this planet, our care for the physical world right now, the ultimate rehearsal for eternity?
That is a phenomenal, deeply challenging question to ponder. It changes everything about how we interact with the material world around us.
Think about that the next time you find yourself standing on the banks of a river, feeling the dirt under your feet, wondering what comes next. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.